Hello, welcome. Some people are still on their way in, but I'd invite you all, if you're mingling, go ahead and take a seat. Want to welcome you. This event is put on by Rights and Democracy with Tom Proctor as their housing justice organizer and the Brattleboro Working Group for JCE, Just Cause Eviction, which are 3 of us. So at the end of this meeting, if any of you would like to join us, we meet on Zoom at 6 p.m., and I'm happy to give you an invitation. So I wanted to say welcome and tell you how I got to do this work and why it's important to me. So my name is Marta. I'm a Brattleboro resident for about 5 years now. I lived in Guilford before that. And I love Brattleboro and meeting my neighbors. And there's a particular neighbor I met who had helped me out an awful lot while I was recovering from cancer and surgeries. And she would come to my house and we would talk, and turned out over the time we knew each other, we found all these people in common we knew. And you know, she used to walk dogs with Becca Balint, and I volunteered for Becca Balint's campaign. It was all this great Brattleboro synergy. But something happened, and that was in January of this year, her landlord gave her a no-cause eviction, which meant that as of January of this past year, she got a letter that she had 60 days to be out. Hadn't violated lease agreements, none of that, and this is completely legal. What ended up happening was we found out the hard way, my friend and all of her friends and support people, that moving in Brattleboro is pretty impossible, especially if your budget's low. So, you know, her rent had been, I can't even remember, like $9.95 or something. And at that moment in time, when we looked online, the only available apartments in Brattleboro were in the new Elliott Street apartments, and it was a tiny, tiny 1-bedroom for $1,700 a month with credit check and no animals, and she has a cat. And we said, okay, we can do this. And she has deep, deep roots in this community. So many friends were looking out for her. And we all kind of went on this journey to support her. And what ended up happening is she did literally everything to find somewhere new to live. She got a list of every single landlord in town and called down it, cold calling. She went to Facebook, Craigslist. I mean, she made a Facebook account because people told her to go on Facebook. She went to all of the realty and property management companies in town. They all said, we don't have anything. We'll let you know when we do. None of them ever did. And when she started calling, 30 days later to follow up, they got annoyed with her. Like, we'll call you when we have something. And, at that point, it's like 30 more days before you're supposed to move and be out. And her landlord was really crotchety. He did not want her to be there. He said, you need to be out. This place you lived in 7.5 years, a neighborhood she'd lived in for more than a decade. And literally, there was no housing for her. We thought we had someplace. Somebody said, my friend is making an apartment over the carriage house, and that might be a possibility. And she got excited and told us all. Well, then it turned out that friend turned that carriage house apartment into an Airbnb. Then she got another, she was walking neighborhoods and going up to buildings, and if she saw a landlord's number on the outside, she would write it down, and if she saw somebody coming out, she'd say, is anyone in your building moving soon? I need to move. Do you have your landlord's number? And she got a hold of a landlord in her neighborhood that way, and that landlord said, oh man, I wish I had met you like last week. I just rented an apartment. It's to a couple from New York, and they're only going to use it in ski season on the weekends. And this kind of thing happened over and over again. I mean, this woman is a local person in our neighborhood. She had her list of references that included like Gaines. She worked at Gaines Farm. She worked for the Jewish Community Center. She had the rabbi down as one of her references. And she never ever got an apartment. So what happened is she overstayed, or at least, and when she did, she actually applied for one she heard was moving, and that landlord hadn't advertised the apartment. All that had happened was friends said, oh, I know someone who lives in an apartment who might be moving. Let's figure out who that landlord is. She contacted that guy, and he said, well, I haven't advertised this or told anyone about it, and you're the 11th person to ask me about it. And so she did all of her application, wrote a little statement about why she needed to be there, and he said to her, we're going to look at all of these over the weekend, and because we want to be a responsible local landlord, we're going to do this on a need-based. My wife and I are going to decide who to give the apartment to based on need. And when she got a call on Monday, he said, I'm so sorry, but somebody else was more in need. So she ended up overstaying her eviction notice by almost 3 months at that point. And what ended up getting her an apartment was that she went, she asked us to make like those little flyers where like it's a half page about you and then like little tear off with your phone number. And she went and she put those on bulletin boards at the co-op, at the Putney Co-op, all around. And then she got a great idea. She had some bright pink poster board, and she put that behind that, and like kind of cut it into a star so that it would draw people's eyes. And eventually she got an apartment off of that. Somebody had seen it and called her and said, I know an apartment. You could potentially move into it. It's in Putney. And she did eventually move there. But it was the most nerve-wracking time in her life, those 5 months. She'd be in tears almost every single day. She was looking, like she said, I wake up in the morning, I check Craigslist like you taught me, I check Facebook, I lose apartments, people, they just aren't. So what happened was she now lives up in Putney, gas prices are high, she's away from her support and community, and the trauma that 5 months made in her life. I saw this woman go from coming over to me with a cheerful face, helping me when I wasn't doing so well, always saying to me, cheer up, let's do something to make you happy, to just crying. And she hasn't recovered. I mean, this is months later. When I asked her if I could tell her story tonight, she said, please, this ruined my life. And so when we talk about no-cause eviction, and you'll hear a lot of folks talk about it in different ways, I want to ground us in the fact that when we're talking about tenants who have done nothing wrong, they pay their rent, they have not violated their lease, getting a no-cause eviction, no cause meaning haven't done any of that, and get 60 days to leave their apartments, we are likely relegating many of our neighbors, our friends and community members to potential homelessness. The only thing they can do is put all their stuff in storage and live in a hotel room. I mean, this housing shortage, this economic crisis we're having, it isn't ending. And with people moving in with middle and upper incomes, of course any landlord wants to rent to them, and that's their right. But let's try to center this conversation in our neighbors, our residents in Brattleboro, and not adding to this trauma and not creating homelessness from people who have homes and haven't done anything wrong. All that by said, hang on, we're gonna do some Q&A at the end. We have Tom Proctor here with us. Tom? Yes, and he is the housing justice organizer at Vermont Rights and Democracy, and he is the one who convened our little group together and has been helping us get organized, and hopefully...
I really didn't know. Are there any landlords in this group? Oh, I'm not in the group. I haven't been invited.
Well, no.
The working group at the moment?
Oh, and let me just say, the working group is just because Rights and Democracy sent out a survey of members when I was going through this earlier this year, and it said, what's on your mind? And I write down housing. And then I got an email saying, can I connect you to Tom Proctor? So this is the time we are coming out to folks at Brattleboro and saying, Rad's convened a couple of us together. We want to invite you to our Brattleboro working group. This is your invitation. So with that said, our host, Tom.
Thank you very much. And yeah, just to clarify, this working group's been together for a few weeks now. It's been a very small group, and we've been organizing this event and trying to get all of this started. As Marta said, tonight is your opportunity to learn more about Just Cause Eviction, what we're doing in the Brattleboro community and communities across the state, and hopefully join us in our work group. And we invite anyone who's interested in helping us push this issue. So.
There's a distinct problem here, and that is that if the base problem is lack of housing, and we're trying to, I think.
Hey, Fred, we actually have a whole program.
Yeah,
We're going to have discussion.
Yeah, we'll have a Q&A at the end. And so let's just stick with the speakers for the moment. And at the end, we will be having a Q&A, and I'd love to take any questions that we don't answer at this moment in time.
I just need to say that if you're committed to trying to end no-cause evictions, rather than actually trying to figure out how to solve the problem with all of the people who are involved in housing, then there's a bunch of us here who are probably wasting our time.
I am
If
fully
you want
aware.
to actually solve the problem, I would love to discuss that because I have a lot of ideas how to do that, and I've been trying to work on that for a couple of years or more.
I'm sure you do. This is the Just Cause Eviction campaign in Brattleboro. I also am involved in several other campaigns statewide that is also addressing these issues. And I'd be happy to speak to you more about this at the end. But for now, I'd really like to continue with the program, if that's okay. Thank you. So good evening, Brattleboro. Thank you so much for attending tonight. I'm really encouraged by how many people are here. My name is Tom Proctor, as Marta has already alluded to. I'm the Housing Justice Organizer for Rights and Democracy. As RAD's Housing Justice Organizer, I successfully organized tenants, homeowners, and landlords in Burlington to place a robust, sensible Just Cause Eviction charter change on the 2021 Town Meeting Day ballot. At that Town Meeting Day, despite being outspent by our opponents $20 to 1, we emphatically passed a charter with a 64% majority and achieved a majority in all 8 wards in Burlington. We then took this charter to the State House, successfully getting it through the House and the Senate with emphatic victories. Finally, following a veto by Phil Scott, we lost the override vote by 1 solitary vote, a vote that was changed on the floor of the House in that very moment. At RAD, we know by using grassroots people power, we can pass meaningful change in local communities. We know how to train up local leaders like Marta and Anne to spearhead campaigns, and at RAD we know that with determination, knowledge, and organization, we win, and we win big. This year we're organizing in communities across Vermont to create landmark tenant protections for thousands of Vermont residents. In 2023 Town Meeting Day, we'll be celebrating victories in Brattleboro, but Montpelier, Essex, Winooski, and Hartford, towns just like Brattleboro that have decided that enough is enough when it comes to unjust evictions. To let you know why this policy is so important and why we now have a statewide support for our proposal, I want to speak about the current state of rental housing across Vermont. My work with RAD has placed me on the front row of an escalating crisis in Vermont, directly affecting a near third of state residents who rent their homes. A crisis that, if left to continue, will affect every single one of us in the future, and that's landlords and homeowners alike. Can I have slide number 1, please? The issues with rental housing in Vermont are multifaceted and have created a perfect storm that has led to catastrophic damage to housing stability and availability. The first major issue is lack of supply. In the last 30 years, the growth of available homes has plummeted, with just 0.1% of additional rental housing coming online between 2010 and 2017. I think it's actually the previous slide will demonstrate this. Just left arrow a couple of times. There we go. Oh, actually, one more, if that's okay. There we go. Yes. So you can see here that between 1990 and 2000, we had 0.8% growth, and then it declined between 2000 and 2010, and now just 0.3% came online in the last 7 years up until 2017. This lack of availability has been compounded by pandemic and climate migration. In 2021, for the first time in decades, Vermont saw a net increase in new residents. The socioeconomic makeup of this population group is likely to be middle to upper middle class. Despite the first net growth of Vermont population in decades, job availability is still at post-pandemic levels, suggesting there has been no growth in the labor force participation. This has also led to a sharp increase in homes that are vacant but unavailable. As Vermont becomes more attractive to real estate investors and second homeowners, our available housing stock has dwindled. For every 4 houses that exist in Vermont, 1 of them is left vacant for the majority of the year, leading to statewide vacancy rates for available houses to be at catastrophically low levels. A healthy availability rate for a housing market is 6%. Vermont's vacancy rate in 2021 sat at 2.4%, with experts expecting this to fall further in 2022. And the next slide, please. A tight housing market has led to exploding house prices, with the lower end of the market seeing the largest rise in prices. According to a Burlington Free Press report, the median sale of the price of a family home rose more than 16% in 2021 to $382,000, meaning renters looking to own their own homes have found it increasingly difficult to do so, putting further pressure on an already overburdened rental market. Next slide, please. In short, we do not have enough, in fact, that's fine. In short, we do not have enough available houses, we're not creating enough new housing, and the demand is only getting higher. This puts enormous financial strain on renters, who are being priced out of a severely limited market and leading to mass evictions as landlords seek to find richer tenants. The 2020 Vermont Housing Needs Assessment, written before the pandemic, has data showing that over half of renters in Vermont already have housing costs that consume more than 30% of their income. The standard for assessing affordability. Half of those paying above affordability rates pay 50% or more of their take-home income on housing. It is estimated that the average renter in Vermont earns $13.40 an hour. So take-home money on that, 25% of Vermont renters are paying half of that take-home income on housing. A sharp increase in rental prices has put pressure on other areas of our economy, as consumers are required to spend the vast majority of their income on housing. Next slide, please. The current market condition is incredibly hostile to renters, but it's a seller's market for landlords, which many have been quick to take advantage of, with disastrous consequences for tenants. With no risks of having their units unfilled due to an outrageous demand, some landlords have been evicting their current tenants to take advantage of a richer market. Some landlords have seen their properties skyrocket in value and have understandably sold to out-of-state real estate investors that have no knowledge or love for our community and just wish to make a profit. And some landlords have seen an opportunity to rid themselves of problematic tenants that have had the audacity to complain about code violations or discrimination. The result of this has been an explosion in no-cause evictions, a legal recourse for a landlord to rid themselves of a tenant if that tenant has done nothing wrong, and an option any landlord can take when filing an eviction notice. The difference between a landlord filing for an eviction for non-payment of rent or lease violation versus a no-cause is that while tenants can argue against or even remedy an eviction for the former complaints, in a no-cause eviction case, there is no legal recourse for the tenants. While the courts now see in excess of 50% of all eviction cases being for no cause, the problem is in fact far worse than that. As an eviction on your record often means not being able to rent again, as a tenant is required to provide that information when filing a new rental application. Most tenants vacate the property when asked without the issue ever reaching court, meaning thousands of Vermonters are being evicted each year with no place to go and often for no reason, and there is no record of it. This has led to population centers being drained of lower-income residents. There's been a 125% increase in the homeless population in the last year. A generational strain has been put on public housing and services, and there's been a gutting of historical communities across Vermont, including Brattleboro. This is an issue that is affecting all of Vermont, but particularly in places with a high percentage of renters, such as this community right here. Our proposal is that Brattleboro adopt a regulatory policy for businesses that lease property for use as domiciles. This policy would ensure tenants are protected from arbitrary eviction and are free to lease a property unless a codified violation occurs. This policy is needed due to the current market conditions of the rental industry and the exacerbating crisis created by its current trajectory. The proposed policy will prevent widespread homelessness, worker shortages, and foster community growth in Vermont's population centres. Next slide, please. A just cause eviction policy is a policy that protects renters from arbitrary, retaliatory, and discriminatory evictions by establishing only certain reasons that a landlord can evict, known as just causes. These causes include a non-payment of rent, a violation of the terms of lease, a violation of state statutes regulating tenant obligations, and a tenant's failure to accept reasonable renewal terms. Just cause provides the right of first refusal for tenants to renew their leases once they expire. It has been successfully implemented in 4 states. Next slide, please. California, New Jersey, New Hampshire, and Oregon, as well as dozens of other cities across the United States. Under just cause, lease agreements will still remain as lawful contracts between tenant and landlord, and will still have a start and end date just like any other standard lease. However, there will be a right of first refusal granted to tenants to renew a lease after its expiration. Landlords will profit regardless of whether a tenant decides to renew due to market demand, and would be able to benefit from a steady stream of income due to residents who continue to rent with the assurance of not being displaced unexpectedly. Under just cause regulation, landlords also have the right to change a lease year on year. If there are actions a tenant consistently performs that the landlord does not agree with, they are well within their rights to ban those actions in future leases, as long as the rules are non-discriminatory. The next slide, please. The Brattleboro Just Cause Eviction Working Group has done phenomenal work in creating a Just Cause Eviction charter change proposal. I urge you all to read the proposal in full and sign your name to putting this policy on the ballot this town meeting day, so the people of Brattleboro can decide whether or not they wish to adopt this crucial, responsible, and basic tenant protection. To get this charter change on the ballot in Brattleboro in 2023, we need 500 signatures from registered voters in the city by January. Once on the ballot, we need a simple majority to pass the charter and send it to the State House for approval. RAD is currently setting up Just Cause working groups in the 5 towns that are seeking to place this on the ballot next year, led by locals within their community. We'll be selecting leaders from each group to coordinate with each other and share resources under RAD's guidance to give each campaign the best chance to get the majority we need to send these charter changes to Montpelier. If you wish to get involved, and again, I really urge you all, you can do one or more of the following. Sign our petition to get this charter change on the ballot, bring home petitions to your neighbors or co-workers or friends or family to sign, and most importantly, become part of our work group. It is a weekly hour-long meeting on Thursdays held between 6 and 7, where we discuss tactics, outreach, and messaging, and it's also a great place to learn a little bit more about Just Cause Eviction. We are creating a movement here in Brattleboro, a movement to create a community that works for all of us, not just those with means and money. If this is a future that you wish to see, just like the wonderful leaders we have joining us tonight, I see you, Emily Kornheiser, we cordially invite you to join forces with us and help us take the first step towards an equitable housing future for the people of Brattleboro. Thank you. And now I welcome Emily Kornheiser to the stage.
Where did you get that water that you have? Oh, nice. That would be awesome. Do you mind? Thank you. There's nothing like being a short person following a tall person at a mic. I guess maybe that happens to tall people too sometimes. I just tend to see it less often. Hi, I'm Emily Kornheiser. I'm one of 3 state reps from Brattleboro. I think I know most of you. I represent the district that's now called District 7, which is essentially West Brattleboro, and I'm running for re-election. I had a very funny moment. Thank you, Bob. When I was this morning, I was walking and I was thinking about coming here today and talking to all of you about Just Cause Eviction. And I was thinking about the many years that I was a renter in Brattleboro and Burlington and other places and the various experiences I had there and my friends who were renters. And then I realized that like most of my social group at this point is folks who own rental units. And I was like, how did I just like jump class brackets? Like magically one day. And when did that happen? And how does that change my perception and my ability to legislate, actually? Because I was thinking about these conversations, like whatever I'm going to say tonight, and however I'm going to support Just Cause Eviction, and how I'm going to talk to, my friend Lisa when we're going for a walk every week, or Bob, who I really like, or whoever, any of you that I've spoken to before, and how I really speak to renters less often now, because that's not my social class, because I found myself a heterosexual male partner, and now I'm like a, two-earner household, and so I don't rent anymore, I own a house. And how the vast majority of my colleagues in the legislature are in a very similar position. The bulk of their social class, because of really like the pretty significant privilege that you need in order to serve in this mostly unpaid, underpaid position in the State House, means that most of us in the State House have fairly high incomes compared to most of our constituents and tend to own our homes. I think there's maybe 3 renters in the whole legislature. And so I say that all just to say that I'm standing here with a weird vulnerability that I didn't realize I would have when I was feeling righteous yesterday. And to know that these are really complicated issues. And to say that Brattleboro does some really amazing work to pass charter changes, as many towns do. And then it's the job of our legislative delegation, Molly and Tristan and myself, if we're reelected, Wendy, if she's elected, not reelected, to then go to the State House and get this charter change through the legislature. And a lot of the times when we're doing that, we still haven't passed the youth vote, I say, Brattleboro, the one and only, so that I can convince my colleagues that we could do crazy stuff down here in Brattleboro and they don't have to worry about it happening to them. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But just to say that this meeting here today and the ability of tenants to come together and talk to each other about their needs and talk to their elected representatives about their needs is the first step in a really long journey, and I'm here for that journey. And I'm here to be humble in that journey about the experiences that I've had in the past and to hear about the experiences that people are having today in the present. We're in an interesting time in our economy right now in Vermont. Workers in their workplaces have in some ways more power than they've had in a very long time, right? Wages are rising, and people have the ability, much more of an ability to leave their job and go into another job than they have in the past. Not always. It's still a fairly narrow market, but much better than we have in the past. And as that's happening, the political will to pass worker rights laws is waning, because we're saying, oh, workers can negotiate their own rights because they have power in the marketplace. And at the same time, those same folks are experiencing much less power in the rental marketplace than they might have 10 years ago, 20 years ago, because properties are so scarce, so scarce. Even, buying a property is so scarce. So I actually bought my house not because I particularly wanted to be a homeowner, but because I just could not handle being a renter with a dog anymore. And so at the same time that workers have all of these rights in the workplace now, and we're thinking about not passing legislation for that, renters have so much less power in the marketplace than they have previously because it's so scarce. And we have some tenant protections in place, absolutely. We have, housing safety rules in place. And I have known so many tenants who, even though we have these existing protections in place, aren't willing or able to act on those protections because it's better to stay in a kind of terrible situation than have no situation at all. Because I hope at least, that everyone in this room can agree that we all have a right to have a safe home in this amazing community that we all live in. And I think everyone in this room does something different to make that happen, to create those safe and stable homes for folks. And when we have a marketplace that has become so distorted through really mediocre state investment over 20 years, through a dwindling, a very slow economy in Vermont, through a bunch of different, some regulatory challenges, when we have this housing market that, as Tom described, is really in dire straits, it's a time where the state steps in to create more regulatory control and more rights for the people who have less power. Like, that's the state's role, right? It's to equalize equity and power in places where we don't have it. That's why we have labor rights, that's why we have environmental rules, and that's why we have tenant protections. And so, you know, in the next 5 to 10 years, I'd like to say that we're going to create massive cooperative housing projects in this state, that we're going to deeply invest in affordable housing, that we're going to really put a lot of money to the Vermont Housing Finance Agency so people can buy, like, first-generation homeowners and affordable homeownership and all these things, that we're going to, like, fix the housing market at a very base level so people can access the kind of housing they need that holds the power that they want for control in their own lives. And the only folks who are going to be renting are going to be folks who want to be renting, right? And so the power situation will be ironed out, but, like, that's not where we are today. And so because we're not there today, the state does need to step in some ways. And there are a lot of tools for that. One of them is rent control, which is a really powerful tool that's been used in cities. You know, the New York that I knew when I loved New York was a New York that was formed by rent control. And people of all varieties could live together in community. Just Cause Eviction is one of these. And it really recreates power dynamics that are much safer for people to live in diverse communities. And that's what we need here. We need diverse communities where everyone can show up and thrive. Reference checks, credit checks. There are some places where people who rent get to do reference checks on the people they're renting from. We don't do that here. But, like, that's another way that we balance power. We've done a lot around the rental registry in Vermont and ensuring that we have repairs and safety, and I'm so grateful that Brattleboro, like many other times in its history, took the first step to say, like, we need safe and affordable rental housing. And I know that folks were some of you all here were, like, so scared and kind of pissed about that when it was first starting, but I personally, and maybe Daniel, has heard stories since, but from what I've heard from folks, that's gone fairly well. And so I think change can be scary, and it can be unclear what the purpose of it is, but as a legislator, my role is to make sure that in this country we live in that is founded on the marketplace, we're making sure that the state's able to step in to correct those power imbalances so that we can all live and thrive in diverse communities. And at this point in Vermont, in the housing market we have, before we can really, like, fix the housing market in a big way, we need to pass tenant protections to make sure that folks can feel safe and secure in their homes. So I thank all of you for being here today. I'm grateful that you both were patient with my personal story and patient with my something of a intellectual exercise about the reasons for power in government. And I am looking forward to hearing from my colleague Molly Burke to talk herself about housing. Thanks, Molly.
Another short person. And I think it's coming off. Welcome, I'm Molly Burke. I represent district formerly called District 2, or Wyndham 2-2, and it's now Wyndham 8, Brattleboro District 2. Just so people understand. I'm from District 2, and I just been thinking about this lately, and knowing that I was going to be speaking here, and I support this concept of how do we help people to not get evicted. There are many economic reasons to have tenant protections. Creates a stable workforce and could help small businesses in town keep employees so people aren't having to move somewhere else. So that's one thing. And then there's the human issue. And this week, maybe last week in VT Digger, there was a very poignant story about that sort of detailed this veteran who was getting evicted. And it showed his furniture being carried out of his house, and it was a very compelling story. And he had to spend $100 to put his things in storage, and then he talked about, and he was going to be going and living in a tent for a while. He eventually wound up in a shelter. And the landlord said that he violated the conditions of release, but conditions of the lease, but it was a little bit unclear why he was being evicted. And he talked about things like, I put my fingernail clippers in my storage unit, and now I have to go out and buy some. I mean, just sort of the thought of somebody having to have all their possessions taken out of their building, and where are they going to go? I've also encountered a couple of other people, emails from constituents saying, I have to leave my apartment and I have nowhere else to go. I've looked and looked and looked. And then this gets into the whole thing that we're talking about, is the housing situation. And these issues intersect. And I see landlords here who are trying to provide good housing for people. And I think that this is a conversation that we need to have about how do we protect tenants, and how do we make it possible for landlords to provide housing, especially local landlords, and not have housing go to out of state big corporations. So I really don't have a lot to say. I think that what's really going to happen is we're going to have a good conversation about all of this and try to understand points of view. I know that no-cause evictions have gone up in recent years. In 2016, just 18% fell into this category. In 2021, more than half did. So, these are figures. It's becoming, I think this is issues coming up because there are more evictions, and it's more of a problem, and intersecting with the lack of housing. This year, at the end of the legislative session, we passed a really good housing bill related to safe and affordable housing, HS 266, which provides down payment assistance to first-time and first-generation home buyers, grants to repair mobile homes, it would create denser neighborhood development areas with construction-ready building lots and a mix of housing types, and establishes other programs to subsidize disadvantaged communities. And then there's another bill, S 210, set up a rental housing improvement program to incentivize private apartment owners to weatherize and make quality improvements. So this is not going to happen immediately, I think, as Emily said, but these are things on the horizon that we can be thinking about in the big picture that get more people into owning their own homes, help landlords accept their apartments. And I think that's really all I have to say right now. I'm really looking forward to hearing what everybody has to say in the discussion. Thank you.
And the mic goes up. Tristan Tolino, Brattleboro's 3rd District, new district, Wyndham 9. And I'll try to be fairly quick because you've heard a lot from the politicians and we want to hear from you. And I think there are a couple of guest presentations coming in virtually as well. We are in a classic wicked problem. There are no obvious solutions anywhere. And it's crucial that we have really robust conversations about it. That's the big picture of what we want to do together to try to solve this problem. I will say I did support the veto override. I would support Brattleboro's charter if this passes, and for many of the reasons that Emily described, that people are feeling extraordinarily vulnerable right now, and we do need to be balancing those risks of vulnerability with the larger systemic issues that we're facing. One thing that came up in front of the committee that I'm in the Appropriations Committee in the House, was the spending plan for some of these housing dollars. And I may get this wrong. I apologize. I'm a little tired and a little out of my element on the housing policy side. But I believe that we heard that there were 30,000 units statewide that are currently offline for code violations, other kinds of reasons. We created a program in the pandemic, the Vermont Housing Improvement Program, VHIP, which is a rental improvement program that gave grants of $25,000 to $50,000, I'm doing this from memory, to landlords for improvements in exchange for agreeing to keep the housing affordable for 7 years, I believe was, and we could not put, is it set, was that? 5 years, sorry. As I said, I'm doing from memory from March, but when we had a discussion about whether we should take the 10 million that was being recommended for what they call the missing middle program or other programs. I thought, well, if we have 30,000 units that are currently offline that we can get online faster for less money, why are we taking something that will take 2 or 3 years to play out when we are literally in the biggest short-term housing crisis that any of us have ever seen, and there's no relief really in many other parts of the country as well. So we're not unique in the situation that we're in, but it is extremely acute. And so that didn't happen, but I think that that's another place that we can look as how do we shift the conversation back to what we can do together as quickly as possible to level the playing field a little bit for renters, to change the housing dynamic. The last thing I'll say is I graduated high school in Brattleboro in 1989, and the total population of Brattleboro was almost exactly what it is now. And recently, somebody from the Brattleboro Planning Office was at a Rotary Club meeting presenting on housing. And I asked him, I said, my best guess is that the net new housing in Brattleboro since I graduated in 1989 is probably less than a couple hundred units. And he said, I don't know that number off the top of my head, but I think you're right. So unfortunately, that if I've done my math correctly, that was a long time ago and like multiple decades ago. We haven't fundamentally changed the dynamic here. It's time for us to think about that in a different way. Hopefully we can find some comprehensive solutions, and in the meantime, provide a stopgap for people who are at the edge, at their wits' end with the vulnerability that they're experiencing in this housing market. Thank you.
Next, we have Brenda Siegel, who's currently campaigning to be our as a Democrat for our governorship, and she is here with us live via Zoom. And all I can say about Brenda is, if housing is the topic of the day, Brenda is the guest that we need. If you haven't seen her debates, go on and look at them. Housing took a really, really, really strong topic, and it was very, very stark. Her knowledge and compassion on that topic. So Brenda, here you are.
So hi there, everyone. I'm sorry I can't be there with you tonight. We are in between multiple events, and I obviously would love to be home in my hometown and talking to you all about Just Cause Eviction, which is something that I think is extremely important, and I'm really excited is happening in Brattleboro. I want to start by just saying that last year, when I slept on the State House steps to demand that the governor reinstate the program that emergency housed people experiencing homelessness, I was there for 27 nights and 28 days. And one of the things that happened during that time is person after person came up to me and Josh, who was there with me, and they told us their stories of being evicted. And we met several moms in a middle income category who had been evicted from their housing and were living in their car with their children because they didn't qualify for any other supports and they couldn't get back into the current housing market that we have here.
Recording in progress.
And that includes people in Brattleboro, folks in other areas around the state, and it was extremely even shocking to me to find out how many people had experienced that. My experience as a single mom who was struggling financially in Brattleboro was that not once, not twice, but 3 times, my son and I were driven out of the home that we were living in. Not one time under threat of eviction because we demanded that something be fixed, severe mold and holes that were in our kitchen and leaking from the bathroom, so unsafe apartments, so retaliatory. But I didn't really have the power to change that, so I had to find somewhere else to go. And then other times because the landlord would not fix the problem that we had. And the problem is that right now, people really don't have that power to make those demands, as Emily was saying, because if they do, there is nowhere else for them to live. We're talking under 2% vacancy rate. It's not that landlords wouldn't have the opportunity to evict for cause. It's that we wouldn't see people evicting to turn their rentals into short-term rentals or to raise the rent exorbitant amounts. There are really, as Emily said, powerful tools that we can use to better regulate the market in a way that is good for everybody, because our communities are not strong or safe if we cannot keep people housed. And right now, that's what's happening. And when I saw our legislature working extremely hard to do this work, and then those bills get vetoed, that was actually a driving force behind me deciding to run for this race, because right now across the entire state, and I often bring up Brattleboro, people just have nowhere to live. There's no mobility. We can't bring people in to work in our jobs. And the threat of losing your home is far too great to demand that your home is healthy or safe, especially for people in low or moderate income houses. And so we have not only an opportunity right now because there is a will, but also an obligation right now because there is a will for us to do more and do better by the people in our community, my home community, and make sure that we have places for folks to live and make sure that people can remain there and that they can ask for those places to be safe and healthy without risk of ending up on the street. I have been working in some ways alongside Tom on these issues. I released a plan for housing. It included just cause eviction. I've had the opportunity to speak across the state on this issue. And I know that when we do this in town by town by town, we are going to be able to get this across the finish line. We are going to make sure that these charter changes are made and that ultimately we are able to do this statewide, because that's the moment that we're in right now. So I want to thank all of you for coming out in support of it. I'm so glad to have you here making those changes, and I'm going to be working and fighting alongside you, hopefully as your governor. Don't forget to vote. But either way, I'm going to be working alongside you on these issues right until the finish line. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Brenda. You just missed a round of applause, but definitely was one. Thank you very much for joining us. Good luck.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
I don't think I need the microphone. I'm going to try to be really brief because we don't want to be running
for the Zoom folks.
too
Yeah,
long.
for Zoom folks. Use the mic for the Zoom folks.
Oh,
You're gonna have to turn it on.
It's just turn it on.
The mic switches on and off. That's the same. That's the same.
You can tell I'm like a tech pro. Okay, thanks. That was a good reminder. Yeah, so I want to be relatively brief. We did cut out one of our virtual speakers so we can just get to the Q&A and So a tiny little handful of us have been meeting regularly on Thursdays that call ourselves the Just Cause Eviction Working Group, but we want to create a movement to get this on the ballot for a charter change in Brattleboro. And so what does that look like? Well, it looks like whoever joins the working group and wants to work on it will help create the shape of that. But roughly, it's a petition drive to get this on the ballot for town meeting day. And roughly, I think you need around 400 signatures, or it varies from time to time. Percentage of registered voters, we would like to get a lot more than that. So we're gonna need help getting petitions signed, tabling. That basically they're due in January for town meeting day ballot. We would like to get them by December. And after we are successful in getting this on the ballot, we need to create an entity that is capable of fundraising so that we can do a massive educational campaign. So we're gonna need a lot of folks who are willing to do things like table and write letters to the editor and help, would distribute a one-pager fact sheet that, can help really, there's gonna be pushback. That there's a certain element of the powers that be that are gonna be out there in opposition to this. So those people who are in support of this, who wanna join us and get this, we're gonna need all the help we can get, social media. We have been meeting for a couple of weeks at 6 o'clock on Thursdays. If you're not the kind of person who can meet every single Thursday at 6 o'clock, don't worry about that. None of us can. That it doesn't have to be your role in it. There's a lot of things for people to do. And then, so once it's on the ballot, once the signature, we've got, maybe something like 45 days or something to do a massive education campaign. And that will involve, what elections involve, get out the vote, possibly door knocking, whatever it is that people who join this working group would like to see happen to make this happen in Brattleboro. That's basically the broad outlines of it. It'll take shape over the next couple of months. Right now, I want to be done and introduce Anna, who is the Vermont Organizing Director of Rights and Democracy, to say a couple of words, and then we'll just move quickly to Q&A. Okay?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me well? Much shorter, so I'm just going to keep that. I don't want to mess with it. I'm just here, Anne introduced, my name is Anna Mejia. I'm the Vermont Organizing Director with Rights and Democracy. And we are a statewide organization. We also operate in New Hampshire. And we couldn't be doing this work without the local communities here. And so one of the things that I wanted to share with you all for today is just some of the work that we're doing, some of the work from a local organization here, Brattleboro Common Sense. And apologies, there was a script and I don't have access to it, so I'll just say that they're working on a lot of other progressive housing policies. And if you're interested in getting informed and participating in that, please, you could go to their website, Brattleboro Common Sense, or locate Kurt. I don't know if Kurt is in the room right now, but just make a connection there. And yeah, very much gratitude for everyone in the room here and for the local partners who are here supporting us and the progressive housing policies. Thank you all.
Well, thank you all for sitting through that. And I did promise a Q&A, which we will be starting in just a moment. But more importantly, hot pizza just came in. So if everyone just takes a couple of minutes, maybe get some water, grab a slice of pizza, and then we'll come back in like 2 or 3 minutes and we can do the Q&A. Hey folks, so if you guys want to come sit down, I would love to start the Q&A portion of this event. As the poor folks at Brattleboro Community Television were only set to be here till 7, so I thank them very much for going over a little bit. Guys, would you mind? Yes, please.
Hey, everyone. I'd like to hey, Frick. Can I let everyone in the room know something? Can I let everyone in the room know something? Thank you. I just want to announce that Anne baked the brownies that are here tonight. They're almond flour. They're very good brownies. They're in the back of the room. They're quite rich and chocolatey, and they're healthy because they're gluten-free and have almond flour in them. And so with that, I'd like to hand over the mic for the Q&A.
Thank you, Emily. That was possibly the most important announcement of the night, to be honest. All right, so I understand there's definitely questions in the community. We would love to answer them. I'm going to try and keep this at about 10 minutes. As I said, the wonderful people at Brattleboro Community TV are already past time. So yeah, if anyone has a question, I'll be happy to take any on. Yes, sir. That's great, but if you've got a question, I'd like to hear it.
Why are you not dialoguing with landlords before you're making assumptions about what will solve the problem?
So that's a great question, yes. So landlords and being part of this movement is really important to us. At the end of the day, no, we can't just talk to tenants. We can't just talk to even property owners. We have to bring in landlords as well. So throughout this entire process, and this has been a campaign that's been going on 2.5 years now, we have talked to lots of landlords about this particular issue, from very, very large landlords to public landlords like Chittenden Housing Trust, and also smaller landlords as well. And we have got the perspective from lots of landlords, we've got the perspective from lots of tenants, and we've got the perspective from lots of homeowners. And we've also talked to those people in other states where this has been enacted as well to see if there's been any unforeseen consequences when it's been enacted in other states. Now, from where we have been standing, from talking to each of these people, just cause eviction seems like a basic and common sense policy for this state, as well as the states that has been enacted. But we have certainly made sure we've done our due diligence by talking to landlords first about this particular charter change, about this particular policy, and we've made sure we've brought in some of those landlord concerns and put it into that language itself. But thank you, that was a great question. And yes, question in the back. Sorry, sir, you asked your question, I'm asking the person in the back.
We were trying to talk before about with several landlords, none of whom could see the evidence that that was in play.
Will you please, I'm going to ask you to leave, please. I'm a person who rented this venue, and you're being really disruptive and upsetting. Can you please leave?
Let him talk.
There's a lady
You
that...
can stay if you're not going to interrupt.
No, let him talk.
Yeah, let him talk.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's a lady in the back that had her hand up.
Yeah, I just have a question about what you think is going to happen between now and March. Like, obviously, there's a lot of feelings in the room about this issue. Like, what do you kind of feel like are the main challenges that you think that you'll see in the organizing? And I know you're having a lot of calls out, just like, let's get our petitions, let's get people in there. But what are the kinds of events that you think are happening, and what do you think the main challenges are going to be that we're going to face as a community?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. One of which is the fact this language is quite complicated. I'm not going to be around the bush on this one. Charter changes are usually pretty straightforward. With this particular policy, it's fairly wonky and it's fairly in-depth, and it is quite specific as well. The reason being that it is obviously a complex issue, and there has to be a lot of caveats and carve-outs, because we understand that not every eviction is exactly the same. There might be a reason why a landlord needs to take a house off the market, which is at no fault of the tenant, but is still required. So if you walk through the language itself, it is fairly complex, and having people understand that language is quite difficult. At the end of the day, we're asking people not just to sign this ballot to put this on, sign this petition to put this on the ballot. We're also asking people on town meeting day to say yes. And we don't want them to say yes without fully understanding what this actually means for the people of Brattleboro. So that's going to be one of the biggest barriers in the next few months, is really just education, education, education. We want to put on a lot more events such as this, so we really can get the people of Brattleboro to really fully know what it means to put just cause eviction, pass it as a charter change, and put it towards a state house. So that's definitely one of the bigger hurdles. I would say a second hurdle is in Burlington, we got outspent. We raised about $4,000 through grassroots means. The opponents to just cause eviction spent $60,000. And that is a pretty large hurdle to jump. I mean, at the end of the day, we really pride ourselves in our organization and our education methods. But at the end of the day, money also talks, and it's a lot to try and shout against, kind of push back against that barrier. So obviously we try and do that with good organizing methods and reaching out to communities, but there probably will be an influx of money coming into this to try and oppose it, and it's just something to be aware of, and which is why we're trying to get all these groups to try and coordinate and resource share around the state to try and push this. Yes.
Well, I'm a local landlord, I'm a small property owner in Brattleboro. I think we all agree that there's a severe housing crisis. I would like to know how eliminating no-cause evictions will benefit or eliminate the housing crisis, and how many in how many ways it will do that. I don't think that a small number of people who are good tenants who for some reason get evicted through a no-cause eviction are a good enough reason to eliminate no-cause evictions, when most of us landlords will agree if we have a good tenant, we don't want to get rid of them. We want to get rid of the tenants who are annoying the good tenants. And if there are, excuse me, what was your comment?
Well, you said you want to get rid of tenants if you have a reason.
Yes.
Yeah, so to answer your question, so...
My train of thought was interrupted, I'm sorry.
Is it coming to a question? Is it really a question of what's Just Cause going to do to solve the housing crisis? Is there an additional question to that? Because we have to answer both. So
I'm sorry, I was...
So your first question was what's Just Cause Eviction going to do to solve the housing crisis, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So on that front, no, Just Cause Eviction is not going to solve the housing crisis. At the end of the day, the housing crisis has many different facets. It's got many different factors to it. I went through it in the presentation, but there's obviously a lack of supply there. There's an influx of people coming into Vermont. There's second homeowners. There's Airbnbs. There is a plethora of different issues that are facing tenants right now. And Just Cause Eviction is not going to fix all of them. Just right off the bat, it's not going to fix all of them. What it will do is bring a degree of stability back to tenants who live in your community, who will know that if they don't violate a lease agreement, if they don't violate state statutes, if they pay their rent on time, good tenants, as you said, people you don't want to get rid of, if they do that, then they won't get evicted. They won't get told they have to move and have nowhere else to go. So if they are good tenants, and as you said, you don't like getting rid of good tenants, then great, nothing's going to change for you because you're going to keep those same tenants still. If there are tenants who don't pay the rent or violate their lease agreement or are disruptive and get cited or don't agree to a new lease agreement, then you can still get rid of them the way you used to be able to get rid of them. You can still file for eviction. And if you even need to use that house for something else, if your daughter's moving in, if your mother-in-law's moving in, if you need to make substantial repairs, we have carve-outs for those reasons. But what we're trying to do here is to stop tenants from getting evicted that have done nothing wrong. And I think we can all agree that that's fair. Yes?
Spoon Agave, I think coming. I feel that in total, I will sign the petition. I have no problem because I understand why it's necessary. But most people don't. And I don't think that the issue is winnable unless everybody promoting it can explain why housing is a human right. And if you can't articulate that, it's a lost cause. That's the issue that goes back to the beginning of this country and way before. You know, the Declaration talks about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, when the framers sit down to create a structure, it changes to life, liberty, and the rights of private property. And that was never in our history resolved. It is the essential difference between the red and the blue. And in Toll, there can be a good argument, a good explanation of why, of what human rights are and why housing is one of them.
Are you asking?
No,
I will say for me, I do believe housing is a human right, but for me, this issue comes down to community. It comes down to having a community that isn't completely made bland, because only people that can live in those communities have means. It means that communities can have everyone from every different strata still living within it. It means it can thrive because you've got people that can work and live within a walkable distance from their work. I think the trends that we're seeing at the moment will mean that we will have the spirit of our communities ripped out, because we will become nothing more than a vacation land for second homeowners and for those that can afford obscene rents. And I think we'll lose such a large part of what makes certain places in Vermont so special, because we need communities that have every sort of person in them, not just a monolith. And I'm totally with you on all of that as well. Yes, sir.
Thanks for the presentation. I'm Daniel.
Oh, nice to meet you, Daniel.
Nice to not be the only accent in the room. So I'm curious, and I'm actually being slightly vulnerable here because I'm exposing my slight lack of understanding of state statute. Why do it as a charter change? Could it be an ordinance?
It can't, right?
Okay.
Yeah,
Why?
So we looked through this like 2.5 years ago to try and get housing policy through Burlington, and we sat down with a lawyer, and we had all of these different ideas through, and like, which ones can we do with an ordinance? And he basically told us none of them. And the reason why we need to do it as a charter change is because no cause eviction is a statewide law. In order for Brattleboro to be able to put an ordinance even in place, you would need to get permission from the State House to have that kind of carve out for Brattleboro, which is why it needs to be a charter change rather than an ordinance.
Okay, and then
Short answer to that. Bob Fisher says so.
Yeah, I just, as a local person, I asked Bob Fisher, and he told me that's what we need to do.
great, haven't said it. The Brattleboro Select Board last week announced the formation of a Charter Review Commission that is about to get underway. So I'm kind of curious, from an organizing strategy point of view, seeking to do a charter change around one thing when the town is just establishing a probably multi-year Charter Review Commission. I'm not saying that you need to have an answer for that now, but I'm curious whether
As not being a local, I'm going to let the locals speak on this.
Okay. So this has all been.
And for those of you who are interested in the charter,
Yeah, so for the first thing is, when, again, and I kind of got involved with this because as my friend's story was on my mind and I was watching just her deep pain every day, I got a rad survey that said, what are you interested in? I said, housing. And it was just so weird that when Tom contacted me, he was doing Just Cause, and what got me into this was my friend's no cause eviction. So when we started doing this, we realized this is we wanted to do Just Cause as part of a RAD initiative. So RAD, as we know, did it in Burlington. There was this very dramatic situation where it passed, was vetoed, and missed the veto override by 1 vote. And the idea was statewide, how do we build on that for the next year? So this year, there are more towns than Burlington, so I don't even know, like Barry, Hartford. Anyway, and all of them were initially going to take it to town meeting day. And as you know, our town meeting day is very, very different, RTM. And that was when I kind of was like, okay, well, I'm on RTM, can this be an RTM issue? And that was when I went to Bob Fisher, and he said, no, it needs to be it needs to be a charter change because tenancy rights are prescribed by state law. So that's why. And when we looked at the viability of this kind of ordinance in Brattleboro, getting on the ballot was what we needed to do. RTM was gonna just push that down the line. So like if we did it at this year's RTM, it would get on the ballot in like next November, and we wouldn't be helping people. And again, since just in Brattleboro, I know of 3 people in my circle of acquaintances this year who've been no-cause evicted, and all of their lives are unappealable. So we kind of wanted to do it earlier. This also coincides with the town meeting day. So if we get it on the ballot, it'll be March 7th, which is Vermont Town Meeting Day, but not ours, it's our election. But we will, if were we to pass it, we would pass it on the same day as all of these other towns. Winooski is also doing a ballot initiative, but I think some of the others are doing like town meeting day stuff. And then that would all get kind of bundled and go to the legislature together. And it's never going to be what each one of us said. The legislature will change it, make it more appropriate or whatever, but just that it would be addressed and potentially come back to us to have as an ordinance in order to help people during this housing crisis, not after this housing crisis. To keep people in their homes, so like when their kids are enrolled in school, they don't have to figure out where their kid's gonna go to school, so that when they change, their billing address, they don't miss bills, so that they can put their pictures on the wall and stay in their home as long as they've done nothing wrong. So if we did it through any other means, it would kick it down the road and help fewer people. If we do this now and we can get on the March 7th ballot, the idea being, again, it goes to the legislature, but it'll be seen earlier because there'll be a whole bunch of others to bundle it with, and then come back to us and be able to be implemented earlier. And again, when we were talking about this, Tom was informing us, and a bunch of us were talking, we thought that this was the best way to help people in our town more quickly. So that's from the local perspective, the Brattleboro's perspective.
Yes. So, just a question about the educational aspect. You want to spearhead this operation by bringing the facts to the people about all this. I'm just wondering, where are you going to pull? Where are you going to get this information? You say you talk to landlords, Wyndham Windsor Housing Trust, and also that's a great cross section of exactly the supply side of housing. It's pretty esoteric. Actually, they were into it. But I'm curious about and in the balance of how this is going to work with, I think the state's attorneys presented law that landlords can be fined for harboring drug dealers. Now you can say, but that's cause, it's no big deal, but it's not. If you ask an eviction attorney, they always recommend doing a no cause because it's easier. Now, Brenda talking about safety, safe, I want to feel safe. Every landlord wants their tenants to get along and feel safe. Now, if we need multiple police reports and we're trying to prove that there's something going on there, it is a lengthy process. It already takes 6 months to a year just to evict anybody, as is in Vermont. It's Vermont is more stacked towards the tenant than the landlord. That's more than most other states. I mean, this is a little state of 600,000 people. We've got a tax rate up there with New Jersey, Maryland, California, and we don't have the GDP. These are old buildings that us landlords, they're so expensive to maintain. Keeping these porches on, keeping them painted, warm, safe, heating oil's $5. There's a lot of buildings that are just not going to make no money next year. That's a fact.
Yes.
And I could go on.
Sorry, is there a question?
I just want everyone to educate about
do you have a question?
Yeah.
It's a really hard job.
How are you going to bring what I just said and hash out some of these other things under your umbrella of education and deliver that to the people of my town?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question.
Because I live here too, and I have 40 apartments, and the more you stack things against the landlords, it's like, I'm moving. This is crazy.
I totally understand, and thank you for your question. No, I'm not. We do not want to just speak to the housing trusts. We don't just want to speak to tenants. We don't just want to speak to property owners. We do want to hear from you folks, and I completely get it. There is going to be tenants that you find to be problematic that you want to get rid of, and I understand that that is a major concern, especially if you're suspecting they are doing illegal activity. But at the moment, whether or not that person is doing illegal activity, you just get to decide. It doesn't go to the courts. There's no judicial process. That person can be perfectly innocent and still get evicted, even if they've actually done nothing wrong. So what we're asking is the rule of law is applied to people who are living somewhere, so they aren't evicted unfairly or unjustly. And in fairness, of course, there might be situations where you really strongly suspect that's going on, and you might very well be right. All we're asking is to let them have their day in court and either be proved one way or the other. And if they are doing illegal activity, of course you can evict them. Of course you can.
Somebody might get murdered, and that's exactly what happened with terrorists.
So on the subject of the courts, of course, as landlords, you all know that there is a massive backlog right now of eviction cases. And the reason why there's a massive backlog of eviction cases is because it is so easy to evict. And so with just cause, just as in you can select no cause, you can always select no cause. It's now the majority of the evictions that are happening in the state. And so there is this big backlog of eviction cases. With the just cause eviction law, there will be a reduction of frivolous evictions, which will free up the eviction courts for those evictions that should go forward, like those drug dealers. And that would mean that there is a far reduced amount of time you'll have those people there, and so you will be able to get rid of problematic people like that quicker. Yes, sir.
I'm not sure how you come to the conclusion that the eviction cases that are frivolous. One of the problems that we've had is over the last several years, the difficulty of evicting someone who is a problem, or someone who's violated the terms of the lease, or not paid, or whatever it is, has gotten more and more difficult. The difficulty of being a landlord, of trying to provide quality housing to people, as was just spoken about. People who are providing rental housing are trying to provide decent rental housing for everyone, and when there's one tenant there that is destructive, or selling drugs, or has a nasty dog that other tenants are terrified of, it can easily take a year to get them out, even with cause. Wyndham Windsor Housing, my understanding is, pays approximately $500,000 for every unit they own to buy and renovate. If you want housing provided by the private market, by people who are investing their own time and their own money, every time you make it harder to manage and administer that property, you get more and more people who are saying, I'm done, I'm out of this. And the statistic that you showed on your chart there of the available vacancies going down and down, I know several people have said, I'm done with this. I'd rather have it boarded up and vacant than have to go through what I just went through with that last tenant. If you pass this legislation, you are going to make it harder for people to be able to provide decent housing to people. You're going to have more people like myself who are probably going to say, you know what, right now is a really good time to sell.
He works his ass off, too.
This is the kind of thing that makes it harder. It makes it more and more one-sided. Do a Google search. What is the best state to be a tenant in? Vermont comes up. What a surprise. Do a Google search, what is the worst state to be a landlord in? And it will explain why Vermont is, because tenants have so many rights and it takes landlords such a long time to get someone out when it's a problem. So we don't have fair equity of treatment. You talk about you want things to be an equal playing field. Oh God, I'd love an equal playing field.
Question?
Yes, a question. You said that there are thousands of evictions every year that happen that nobody knows a thing about.
Yeah. I was one of them, actually, in March.
How did you come up with that data?
Well, that's the thing about these no-cause evictions.
Nobody knows anything about it.
So there is no way of collecting the data, is there? Because if a landlord decides not to renew a lease, then that is a de facto eviction. So if a landlord decides not to renew a lease, no one's reporting that that landlord isn't is basically de facto evicting someone. But it is happening increasing amounts. As I said, I was no cause evicted just this March. Martha's got 3 friends right now. There's not a person in here that rents that doesn't know it either happened to themselves or someone that they know. It is without a doubt happening. But it's not being recorded. I mean, as I just said, sir, it's impossible.
But you just did put a number.
I said it is going up. I haven't put a number on it. I said it's going up.
How do we know it's going up?
As someone that works in rental and tenant protections and housing justice and has very close ties with Vermont Legal Aid, who do a lot of the pro bono work representing tenants in court, they have told me that it is going up and it is getting to an unprecedented levels and it's completely swamping their ability to do any other kind of work.
If people's leases are ending and they're leaving involuntarily?
They...
No, the landlord generally gives 60 days notice for no cause, and that's all they have to do. That's what my friend had, that's what the other person I had heard of in Brattleboro this year was disabled and on fixed income and needed a first floor apartment, 60-day notice from landlord, no explanation needed, no cause. Obviously that person's not going to be able to go anywhere.
For goodness sakes, we had a state representative sleeping in their car with their children because they were no cause evicted.
And the third I know is a man who is on disability, and he only it's $800 a month, but he has housing, I don't know what he has, and no landlord will take him. He's homeless because of 6
Hey, can I?
I'm not disputing that it's happening.
Anecdotal,
What I'm asking is how do you quantify and say it's getting worse if there's no data?
Can I jump in for a second? So my friend Kelly was no cause evicted, state rep, town clerk, living in Londonderry, no cause evicted, sleeping in her car. That's true. I have friends who have been sexually assaulted by their landlords in this town who did not press charges because they were scared of being evicted. And this random guy with a funny accent from out of town showed up and is telling the folks in this room how to have this conversation. And I really like you, Tom, but I think that's created kind of a difficult dynamic in this conversation and isn't really how we might want to come to decisions as a community. And so what I'm hoping is that perhaps we could recess for the evening and figure out a way to have a more constructive dialogue than people sitting on opposite sides of the room somewhat yelling at each other, and instead come back together again, talk about what the housing market is that we want to have, what is hard about renting units, what's hard about being a person renting units, maybe even not use the word like get rid of or landlord or any of those words which give everyone all kinds of feelings. And we could just come back together and try to have this conversation again in a different way that feels less of a call and response and more of just a conversation. I will also say that I will probably step out of the conversation at that point, so it's easy for me to say that. Yeah, absolutely. When and if things pass, then it'll then be mine and Tristan and Molly's and whoever's the senator, and if we're elected and all those things, job to carry that charter change. And we would carry any charter change that passed, including the youth vote. But at that, I'm going to hand you back the mic. And I hope it was okay that I just did that.
Yes. Okay, so we need to, please, stay, mingle, chat, eat food. We got lots of pizza. But I will say we are going to have Brattleboro Just Cause Eviction Working Group. Although I know and adore many of you in this room who are landlords, I will say this is a tenants movement, but I will also say we all live in the same town and know each other incredibly well. That's my old landlord, who is always wonderful to me, by the way, until tonight when he screamed in my face. So what this has shown us is we have a tenants movement, we have a landlords movement, and when landlords, who for us tenants, you hold the power. We're scared of you. You have the money, you own our homes. We need to have different forums. So we will have just cause eviction meetings for people interested in that cause. And I feel like what we got from tonight is we'll also have some dialogue meetings. But those will be different things. And all I ask is no more raising of voices, pointing in people's faces, or hijacking other people's meetings. But we will do this together. At the appropriate times, we'll come together and have these hard conversations, and at other times, will be a movement of citizens. So I think we can do both. And I just want to end on that note. Please just stay, talk, chat, eat.